Vicky, I haven't heard from, I don't
from
know
the
if she'll,
registrar.
Vicky should be here.
yeah.
And it's kind of like, somebody said, well,
So
your
we're just
son
call
is
order
the.
and
Yeah,
then,
call meeting order and get a motion to adjourn to exec.
My daughter is the, valedictorian of MIT.
So
Wanted
that's
to
the
get married,
topics.
and of course,
What's that?
The
they
topics.
produce kids
for the
who
executive
are.
session.
Yeah, you have to read the topics.
All right, let's call a meeting to order.
Yay!
And I would like to move an executive session and talk about personnel matters. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Let's do this.
The nicest
everyone. Arlene Thomas couldn't make it tonight. She's with us weather, so I'm taking over for her duties this evening. I'd like to welcome everybody and happy holidays. Let's start. I guess first on the agenda, certification for Mara.
Yes, so Mara completed her training to be officially approved so she can evaluate administrators. You know, as you know, we changed the title of Mara's role last year from a director to an assistant superintendent line. And as part of that process, we want her involved in administrators' evaluations. And so the state requires you to go through a process to achieve certification for that, the training session. So now that she's completed that, the board would have to approve that.
All right. Any discussion, questions? Do you have a motion to approve?
Motion?
Second?
That's
All-
Jen, second? Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
It's
can give you more
approved.
work.
Congratulations, Laura.
All right. I guess the next item on the agenda is draft of the minutes. And I wasn't at that meeting, so everybody had a chance to read it. And is there any comments on it?
No comments.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve? Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's approved. I guess we'll turn it over, I guess, to Roy at this point.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. As Mike did, I also want to express my wishes for a great holiday season. Hopefully it's restful and peaceful and most importantly healthy as we get into the holiday parties and such. I wish you all Happy New Year as well, because next time we're thinking will be 2022. Before we get to other comments, I just wanted to acknowledge, I don't know that we've ever had a chance to acknowledge the school shooting that occurred in Michigan recently, and send our thoughts and prayers to those families the school community was affected so tragically by that shooting. And it would be just nice to express that. And just today, as you saw, I sent out a communication to the community regarding some TikTok threats that were made, not only, and certainly not to us specifically, Bronxville was made to across the entire country, related to December 17th as being a day you shouldn't be in school because there were threats being made. The Westchester County Police Department and Westchester DA's office checked all this out, been in touch with our local police as well. It's been determined that it's not a credible threat, it's not a specific threat, and they believe that the TikTok postings were made out of the country. So, it just reminds us all to be vigilant as we, as we enter our schools and look around our schools, and if people see something, they should say something. And also emphasize the importance of us continuing with our safety drills, our lockdown drills. We review everything with Tiff Prenny, our Director of Security, and we're constantly trying to improve on some things. So we would like everybody to know that we take this very seriously and that we will continue to continue with our drills and act accordingly.
Is there anything particular tomorrow's date that either history or?
No, they refer to it as midterms, so there'll be a lot of kids in school. And that's pretty much what I read about. There was nothing attached other than that. Yeah. But again, it's been suggests that it's not a credible threat. It's really not specific to anything or anyone. Quick update on our COVID numbers, and actually we've been getting hit more dramatically with the regular flu than we have with COVID. But as you know, all around us, the COVID numbers have been increasing dramatically. I heard from Chief Satriali that in the village the numbers are increasing significantly as well with COVID. For us, it's been more the regular flus. We have currently 61 folks who have come down with regular flu. This has all happened relatively recently, right? Since November 20th, I think? 30th.
Yeah.
So that's pretty significant. Regarding our COVID numbers, to date we have 23 students who had COVID at one point. And our staff, we've had 12. And that's been pretty much since, our staff members since pretty much November 19th on that end. So, you know, it's certainly creeping up, and I'm hearing from my colleagues, they're experiencing the same thing. You may have seen Carmel High School is going through remote for the rest of December because of the numbers of people coming down with COVID. So just have to remain vigilant, mask up, try to be as safe as we can, and do the right thing. We continue our testing program weekly, and I think we've now done, what, 4 weeks, 5 weeks? 5 weeks. And as a result of the testing, we've only had 2 positive cases emerge from that, which is pretty good. We're testing, average around 200 people a week. So that's been pretty good. It's a good way for us to kind of keep a barometer on what's happening within our building. That's pretty much all of my update, but at this point, I'm going to ask Aaron Kine to come up and represents the guidance department. He's holding the fort down as others are not here. But if you recall, when we did the long-range planning meeting, we did a few slides from the guidance department, and we said we'd have to come back again with a more in-depth view of what's been going on in guidance from this year. So Aaron has chosen to focus on kind of the college admission process since we're hot and heavy into that season, and he'll give it an update. So Aaron, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Roy. Good evening, everybody, board members, the audience, those at home. I also just wanted to say happy holidays and wish everybody happy and healthy New Year. So tonight I'm going to walk you all through what the counselors and the community know to be one of the bigger decisions a high school student makes, which is where and when to apply to college. I don't think there's ever going to be a time or a way to remove some of the emotional highs and lows of that process. But it's my vision and the department's vision to equip our community with the most relevant and actionable information so that families can make the most informed decisions possible. With that in mind, tonight you'll hear about our wraparound services, which formally start in 10th grade, become more frequent and robust in 11th, leading to 12th grade, where our offices, pre-COVID at least, were a bit like Grand Central Station. In addition to our services, I'm going to share with you some headwinds that our students faced both last year and this year. We'll talk a little bit about the college data. I'm going to share with you a little bit about some ongoing departmental updates, and then open it up to questions. So, 10th and 11th grade is definitely the foundation of starting this process. As 10th graders, we want them to really identify their passions. There's a little bit of a lag here, sorry. Okay, so we did that this past year through this jam board, which we really just simply asked the 10th graders to say what their dream job might be. It's hard to see, and I have a pointer, but there's a student over here that wants to be an interior designer, or a marine biologist, or a real estate broker. And I say that because those 3 things probably couldn't be more different, although the interior designer and the real estate could be the same. But really, obviously our students are eclectic, ambitious, humble, driven, motivated, and want everything to fall into place just the way that it should. And one thing we've been learning as a counselor, as an administrator, as administrative staff, as a school, and sharing with our students is that this is really what life tends to look like for most of us. And if we're able to get the 10th graders to kind of think about things like that, hopefully that'll bring down some of the just free-floating anxiety that they have. And so to just further drive home that point, this is a career roadmap, which we asked the 10th graders to interview a parent or guardian about their path to becoming whatever they are today. This one is obviously blank. There are a lot of great examples, on Google Classroom. I didn't want to put anybody's career path on display during a board meeting. I did find it interesting. You may realize this, may not. There's a lot of fathers in this community that wanted to play quarterback for the New York Jets that are now, partners and managing directors somewhere, which is obviously awesome. But just again, just to show, and it winds, right? Because it's not all linear, right? Everything doesn't happen in sequential order. So this was one of the activities that we had the 10th graders do. Moving into 11th grade, just to understand kind of like the scope and sequence. This is from our junior workshop series, which we've, as of last year, started earlier. So again, this year we actually started them just a few weeks ago. So today was the end of the second session. We'll have another session before break, and then we pick them up again in the spring. And so again, before, if we all just closed our eyes, we could quickly find 10 to 25 colleges we all want to apply to, just based on name recognition. And really what we're trying to get the juniors to think about is, what am I interested in? What am I looking to do? What's the right school for me? And so we had them go through some of these activities. Again, like this mind map over here of their interests. We have somebody that's interested in martial arts, veterinary science, very eclectic group, very different interests. And picking colleges based on bumper stickers is not the best way to go about it, but it's one way to go about it. But if you can think about who you are, what you want to do, what kind of setting you want to go to, we find that those students have an easier path, when it comes to senior year. I'll also share that just today, we, in the workshop, read students' reviews of different colleges without their names, and at the end kind of asked them, would you apply here, would you not apply here? And when you don't know what college it is, you'd be surprised at how many students don't want to apply to certain schools that many of our students do apply to, just based on the reviews. And we were kind of getting vanilla reviews, just so we didn't sway it either way. But it's interesting if you kind of remove that label, what students come to on their own. And we're just trying to reinforce that idea over and over again. So a little bit about, Roy mentioned at the planning session, I shared the admissions data. There's a tremendous context that goes into that, which I'm just going to walk you through right now. So the biggest shift last year and into this year is the change in standardized testing. That change being completely test optional, right? Last year it was something like 1,500 colleges went test optional. This year it was something like 2,000 colleges went test optional. This middle screen grab is from Columbia, which recently announced that I guess for the next 2 years they're going to go test optional. I'm going to come back to that in a second. This has seen tectonic shifts in college admissions, right? This first is these are all just kind of articles that I've clipped here. This was data from the Common App. Among the most selective four-year colleges, 17% application increase. And that was for last year's applicants, right? And you'll see that in a few slides. We saw actually a bigger increase from students here for the most selective schools. There was another, I believe this happened some point in the past 2 months. The University of California system was in discussion amongst their Board of Regents about the use of test scores, the possibility of an alternative exam to the SAT and the ACT. So they, again, I believe it was October, came out and said, not only are we no longer requiring test scores, we're not coming up with any type of alternative to that exam, right? And so the UC system gets something like 100,000 applications. And so all of those schools, more than I can probably name, will no longer require test scores for somewhat seems indefinite. With the absence of test scores, I wish this was a little bit bigger because it's an important point, but with the absence of test scores, almost all colleges, especially the most selective four-year institutions, saw an increase in underrepresented minorities applying to their school. This one reads a 47% increase of colleges that reported this to this organization where I grabbed the headline from, and 55% accepted more Black, Latinx, and Native American students. And so if you remember last year's incoming class, last year's graduates, those students accepted to college were the most diverse ever. And I would anticipate that continues. Back to Columbia for 1 second. The test optional decision is actually sort of an interesting one and quite complex. I'm sure the administrators at Columbia can make a sort of broad sweeping decision without consulting anybody, but in the article they talked about using information from their constituents, right? From their teachers, from their students, and also using the grades of the students that are there now in a few years to see if those students that we accepted without test scores were in fact as successful at Columbia as students that we did accept with test scores. So it's really like a complex sort of decision-making process for some institutions. And I think it just goes to show you that it's you know, well, the Board of Regents kind of just made this broad sweeping decision for those schools. At private institutions, they're thinking about a lot of different factors here. So, you know, so with that change in test scores, this is specifically a quote from Cornell. They don't accept test scores anymore. Maybe I've actually got to change, right? And so just again, applications skyrocketing. Another sort of interesting occurrence that's not so much talked about, but something the department is monitoring, is alumni and legacy admissions. Johns Hopkins was the first to do this. Amherst recently came out and made the same decision. The, you know, whatever added benefit one gets from being the child of a graduate from these two institutions is no longer factored into the decision-making process in admissions. And, you know, Hopkins wrote that it worked. And what that means is that they opened up access to their school to more and more people, right? More and more students were able to apply that wouldn't have applied before. More and more students got in that maybe they wouldn't have accepted before. And so it's literally, I believe, two. But it's two big schools, it's two well-known schools, it's two great schools, and I would anticipate more schools in the next, 3 to 5 years, like adopting a similar policy. All right, so a little bit about the data. So these are our application numbers from last year in the red. You can see that the growth, both in early, and in regular, leading to total applications was quite severe. It's kind of hard because there's some books, but I pulled the numbers of students that submitted applications in these 3 years. While it went up a little bit, it does not account for, 300 plus applications. It's going down this year in terms of, this is not the amount of students that are graduating, it's the amount of students that are submitting applications. There are a few students going to like 2-year school, somebody's hoping to go into the services, so not everybody's applying to college. But you can see right now it's still going up. Not as severe, but nonetheless up. So despite that increase, the number of students accepted at top tier institutions has remained consistent, if not higher. Again, despite the 24% increase in applications last year, the number of students that were accepted at top tier institutions remained consistent, if not higher. So, how does that look like on a big scale? So these were and are Ivy League applications. This over here in the corner, we had of those 14 students, of those 14 applications, I apologize, they made up 12 students. So 12 students got into 14 Ivy League schools. 14 Ivy League acceptances, I'm sorry. of the 20 acceptances, it made up 17 students. So there was five additional students got into Ivy League schools. Somewhat, sort of, I don't know, these numbers are going to go down a little bit, or for that matter, up based on how students do this past week. Students that are not getting in early action, early decision might decide to apply to some more places. Students that are getting in early action, early decision are going to decide to not to apply to as many places. At the most popular schools, so to the right are, I was trying to do 25 because 25 is a nice number. In the top 25 are 6 Ivy League schools, so we're left with 19. So at the 19 most popular institutions, we saw a little bit of a dip in early acceptances, bit of a rise in regular, and pretty consistent overall. Those two numbers in the total, I ran this math like multiple times, so both numbers represent 52 different students. So a consistent number of students got into the top, in this case, 19 schools. So that's what it looks like on a large scale. Just to show you what it looks like on a little bit of a smaller scale, there's a few schools, and Georgetown in particular, because I want to drive home this point about test optional. Boston College is the most popular school. For the past, I don't know, at least 6 years that I've been here, you can see applications went way up last year. Applications are going way up this year. This is pretty consistent here. They released pretty early, like a week or two ago. Of the 3 students that applied early this year, 1 was accepted. I would anticipate a similar amount be accepted regular and netting out to a similar amount in the total applicant pool. Sorry. So Georgetown's a different story. You may recall, Georgetown last year said you have to send test scores. They live or die by them. They're important to them. They were required. And unlike everywhere else that I just talked about, sorry, just trying to get this pointer, numbers went down, right? Not dramatically, but students said, my score wasn't good, I'm not going to send it, and they, adjusted accordingly. This year, students kind of knew what to expect. They saw the writing on the wall, and numbers, went back up as you might expect, but not to the level at which we're seeing at other institutions. This is Duke University. There's a little bit more data here because I want to make a few different points. There's more work for the department to do. There's still questions to be asked. There's still investigation, and there's still growth for us as counselors and as a department. I will say we continue to do that work. I'm committed to that work. There's nothing greater, especially maybe even tomorrow morning, walking into work and seeing some kid with just like this genuine big smile on their face that they got into where they applied to early decision or early action, or even regular for that matter. That's not happening here, and I somewhat take it personally, and I'm making efforts to correct that. In addition to those comments, I just want to point out that students were getting in early, a few regular, and then they kind of stopped, and the students kind of stopped applying. This was 2 years ago. Applications went back up because everything was test optional, right? So that kind of makes sense. They're kind of coming back down again because students and families see that if they're using data to drive their decision making, this data is not reinforcing their choice of applying to this school, right? And as much as data is used to drive a decision of where and when to apply, a lot of this is also very emotional, right? I went there, I feel connected. On Saturdays during game day, we're cheering, we're tailgating, mom or dad, you went there. And so it brings up and tap dances on every single insecurity inside of a student, and probably many insecurities inside of a parent, this whole process. And everybody has a plan on, November 1st, if you will. Everybody has a plan going into November 1st, and then when those decisions come out, sometimes the plans go out the wall, and data and reason goes out the wall, and it's just like, what are we gonna do? How do we solve this? How many more places do we apply to? What should we do, right? And so, sometimes even with the best information, just the timing isn't where it needs to be for students. I also just want to mention, and this kind of further drives home this idea that I have some work to do. The students over the past 2 years that didn't get into Duke got into amazing schools, right? Barnard, Cornell, Dartmouth, Michigan, Harvard, Northeastern, Northwestern, other places that we send students to. So there's a disconnect that I need to explore, and it's very high on my priority list.
Do you have any indication that it's because you thought they were going to go elsewhere?
No, I don't have any indication of that. I'm just going back. Last year, and this happened a little bit already this year, and I'll talk about that in a second. Last year, the representative said, this student, referring to somebody specifically, this student would have gotten in any other year, right? And so what happened here, and what happened in a few places thus far this year, is that there just weren't enough seats for this particular student in last year's class. So I don't think that it's like a interest, or it's like they're not showing enough effort, or their supplements aren't where they need to be, as much as Duke is just extremely highly selective, had astronomical application numbers, and just didn't have enough seats for everybody that they wanted to accept. Okay, so thus far, to my comment about not enough seats, I've had a number of conversations with both admissions officers and with parents this week, and just to kind of give you a sense of application numbers, and this is in no real order other than information that was emailed to me or shared with me over the phone at a couple different schools. So Boston College saw 50% in the early decision applications. Last year was 2,000, this year was 3,000. Their early decision rate dropped to 20%. It went down 20% to 20%. And of the 3 students that applied, 1 was accepted, both of the other 2 were deferred, and the BC rep again said in any other year, 1 of these students would have gotten in. Georgetown, application numbers flat. They were up 100 applicants, right? And again, you see how test scores play a factor in these applications. Tulane reported that they're already going to anticipate accepting 1,500 fewer students because they over-accepted last year. Mind you, 4 of our students that applied early decision, all of them got in. But, Northeastern, just I fell out of my chair, 55,000 applications for early decision and early action. Yeah, this 20 students applied early action to Northeastern. This was the highest early action school this year. Sorry. Cornell, the applications went up by 500. At Dartmouth, applications stayed kind of flat. And I'm going to just kind of read from my notes here because so they reported that they accepted 560 students of the 2,633. It's 21% acceptance rate. They also reported that they accepted 13% of those that were accepted, were children of alumni. 123 were recruited athletes, and 30 were accepted through this scholarship program for low-income students. That brought the raw number of students accepted down to 334, 12.5% acceptance rate. if you weren't a recruited athlete and weren't one of those that were accepted by that was a child of an alumni. And so like, where do we go? I was actually talking with the Dartmouth rep, and she was like, is this the new normal, or is this just like kind of like the baggage of the pandemic and COVID and how students are applying to college? I don't know, she doesn't know. Unfortunately, a lot of times we don't figure this stuff out until like it all ends and we're able to like do a post-mortem, if you will, to look back on it. But that's sort of on the horizon for next year's applicants and for a few years to come. So with all of this information, as I've said, actually, not at this exact podium, but one like it in a different room, you know, we do not stop iterating, we do not stop growing, we do not stop and rest on our laurels, both me as a person and us as a department. We're always looking to push the needle, we're always looking to drive innovation, to bring things to the community that they might need or ask for. This is sort of some of those things. You know, we introduced a second college meeting for juniors as of last year. Again, just like more time with their counselor, better refine their list, better make decisions. You saw some of this redesign, but we continue to innovate with our curriculum. Last year, hold a little of the flyer. The now seniors, then junior class officers said we want to talk about wellness as it relates to college. I said that's an amazing idea. Let's do something about that. We brought back alum. We brought the counselors, Tom Viviano, our school psychologists, admissions officers, and ran a few different sessions covering different topics as it relates to college wellness. This year we had the seniors come back in and started them filling out their common application early in senior year. We then realized in October that there's a large number of students applying to these UC schools, so we should do a similar activity with those students, and we will do that next year. There's a completely different application from Common App for the UC schools. You know, it kind of goes on and on. Just two more that I will speak about. I really think our alumni network and our parent community is fantastic and robust and dynamic and accomplished and so many more things. I really would like to find a way to, when the time's right, bring them in, literally, to have more conversations with underclassmen and juniors about their experience in college and applying to college and what their life is like now. I think that could be a good, you know, kind of addition to some of our programs. And then, you know, last for the list, but not at all last on my kind of mental one. Some of you are familiar with Naviance. It was sort of like the first mover in this college application space and college researching software. It has now become somewhat of a relic. There's other institutions around us, some of them private, that are using different programs, different software that we're exploring. Actually, just today we looked into one as another. There's a few out there, so we're looking at them all to see what makes the most sense for the students and parents and for us as counselors. And of course, I spent ample time this summer with the help of Miss Allen, one of our art teachers, redesigning our school profile, and the feedback that you all gave to Roy, I have been thinking about and have down, and will continue to, you know, kind of investigate and look into that. So just to wrap this all together, last year's graduates went into lockdown, had 30 minutes per class of Zoom for a few months, came back to school, had hybrid learning, followed this beautiful algorithm that Anne created to get them all into the building as much as we possibly could. You know, applied to the most colleges students have ever applied to in Bronxville, got into as many, if not more, and I am optimistic that the same thing will occur this year. And I will also say, you know, the students are just awesome. You know, they're just so ambitious and humble. And I think those are like the two, kind of that combination to me is really exciting to see, because I think those are the type of people that when we get into life and get into the workplace, those are the type of people like I want to work with. And I think that among many of the other qualities that they possess is going to take them all very far, regardless of where they go to college. I'm happy to answer any questions. I thank you all for your attention and time. Again, happy holidays, happy New Year.
One of the things that I've been reading about colleges, because a lot of the students aren't able to actually visit the campuses and it's kind of everything's virtual, but they expect a lot of kids to transfer, that they actually picked a university or college and really didn't turn out not what they thought. Is there any way to track that, or have you heard anything anecdotally about that?
Anecdotally, I would say that the numbers of students that are, you know, first-year students are not looking to transfer. But I know these articles you mentioned, and I'm completely tracking what you're saying. Actually, in talking to Roy, there is some type of clearinghouse database of information that we can get from colleges that report the information about our students. Who like re-enrolls after freshman year, who graduates in 4 years, who graduates in 6 years. Some of this we do through surveys on our own, but like this clearinghouse captures like probably just almost every institution that reports to it. So that's one way we can try to monitor this. I think really it's just, you know, if you're transferring, you need your high school transcript. And so I think we could just track who's requesting that, and that's like a simple, you know, Google Doc that we just create. But this year it's not, I don't know what many would what would qualify as many, but it's not high. And, you know, unlike 2 years ago, like people weren't deferring, so there were like, in terms of like last year's class, like I should say this year's class, there's less sort of COVID spillover from students that were already at college impacting admissions, right? Like that whole gap year deferral stuff is not a factor this year.
And then I went to one of the teach-ins you had a couple years ago, and they brought up, it was an admissions officer, and they said, I remember it stuck with me, they said one of the things that we look at was, we look at your high school, and if we accepted, let's say, 5 students the prior year and none showed up, that doesn't look good, and we track that as a university. With the number of applications that we've increased, not just our school, but all over, is that something that we have to, you know, the counseling department has to think through? Because obviously there's going to be a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's
that they ended up going to.
It's something we should be mindful of as counselors and as a department. The one thing I neglected to share or say is this is, you know, you sit down, you want to apply to fill in the blank school, like, let's get working. This isn't like you can't, you know, we don't operate as a you can't do that.
Sure.
That's not a good place. So kind of with that philosophy, you're gonna get a lot of students that apply to a lot of schools. You're gonna get students that apply to schools maybe that they shouldn't be applying to, and that's gonna drive up numbers. But, you know, I'd really have to look further into it, because I mean, you know, at a few places we had double-digit students accepted and not double-digit students go. But I don't think there's ever a school that there's like a lot getting in and then no going. We usually have 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. I would say that if that was something that came to my attention, I probably would be proactive with that institution to ask that very question. You know, the tricky thing here is, and I was explaining this to a family I was speaking to earlier today, some colleges play things so close to the vest, you can't get any information from them, right? Like this is the information that's on our website, they sort of reiterate that to you, they smile, they say happy holidays, we hope you're in good health, and that's all, right? And the schools that tend to do that are the better schools, right? Like everything's really it's hard to glean information, right? The parents were talking about tea leaves. They don't even, there's no tea. There's no leaves, there's no tea. There's just, data on a screen. But I would do that, right? Like we would make those types of calls. I haven't heard once in the 6 years that I've been here that was the cause of somebody not getting in by any stretch of the imagination. It's more often than not, there weren't enough seats. We would have liked to have more. We would have liked to accept a student, or in a lot of cases, they weren't qualified for this school in addition to the applicant pool.
Aaron, are most of our students still submitting test scores?
So this, I'm going to try to keep this somewhat brief in my response. I would say most of them are. The sort of simple answer to that question is if the student has a test score that's in the middle 50 percentile range of any one institution that they're applying to, they should be submitting those scores. If the scores are not in that middle 50%, they should not be submitting those scores. And so that varies from school to school, and students last year, I applied to 6 places, I sent my scores to 2, I didn't send them to 4. And sort of like, again, only after the fact did we as a counseling department realize that parents were asking, like, well, did that person that got in submit scores? And we wouldn't know that unless we tracked that. We kind of glossed over it, but we're going to track that this year. So next year's applicants, when they ask that question, we have that answer. Because, they send them separate from our office and we don't, we're not involved in that process. But colleges are reporting last year and early so far this year, almost half their class that they're accepting did not submit scores. So it's really becoming, it is optional, right? And the colleges are honoring that optionality and accepting a lot of students in some cases that don't submit test scores.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it varies by school, but the few that I've looked at, there's still 60 to 70% of their accepted students submitted scores.
No, it's it varies by institution, and kind of going back to that Columbia example, it's not just like my GPA and my test score mean I should get into this place, right? These colleges have been around for hundreds of years, right? Are using these data points to predict freshman year grades, to predict graduation rates, to predict things that I probably don't even know that they're predicting, right? And so the absence of the score almost like required them a different way to think about how a student was going to interact with their curriculum on campus, and that's why Columbia mentioned they're going to look at how students did, because nobody knows, right? This student from Bronxville that maybe we wouldn't have accepted if they submitted a test score we're going to accept, but we don't know how they're going to do here. We think they're going to do well because we as an admissions committee said we like this guy or girl or person and we're going to accept them. But once they get here, that's when they see if they're thinking, right? They test their hypothesis about hundreds and hundreds of students at different schools.
I found that they have incredible data on students from particular high schools and how well they've done. So the schools who provide a strong education, it helps for the kids who come later.
Yeah, 100%, right? And so that's kind of the opposite of a lot of people got in, but nobody went. What if a student gets in and maybe doesn't do so well, right? And I wouldn't know, right? Like we wouldn't know these things and how that impacts the future. We hope it doesn't, as we would hope nobody going, but there's just so much wrapped up into all of this.
I'd just like to say this was terrific, and the work that you and your colleagues are doing on behalf of the students in this community is terrific.
I appreciate you saying that. I really do. Thank you.
And I second that. And the data and the analysis that went into this is very robust. It's the field I work in, so well done. It's nice to see that.
Yeah.
And I'm, perhaps for another discussion, I'm curious as to some of these schools that for us are off the beaten path, that aren't in our top 20. If those could become, in some ways, anchor schools that are really good, that we should be applying to, like a Stanford, right? And you're just, I imagine that's probably in our top 50, but not 20.
Yeah.
But
Right.
for a conversation for another day.
Yeah, no, sure.
Because
I mean,
that could benefit us in the same way that the fact that so many of us are applying to the same Northeast schools
right.
is potentially a little harmful.
Yeah, I made this map that I didn't show. The Northeast is the most popular area
Sure.
for our students, and I think for a lot of reasons, but just most simply, it's the highest concentration of great schools.
Great schools here,
Right,
sure.
highest concentration.
Yeah.
California, Texas, and a few states in the Midwest is growing, but I'm happy to have those conversations with you and anybody at
Yeah.
home that might be watching.
Yeah.
I'm open to improving and growing and learning, and and to Jack's point, like it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to like work with this community, and I do not take that honor or responsibility lightly.
Yeah, great work. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you for Bronxville from
Thank you,
Oregon.
Aaron.
Where's Phil?
Should have stayed in Oregon.
Yeah.
Well done, Aaron, thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks.
Right.
We now turn to,
Breaking this up.
Even better.
Good evening, everybody. I have a number of personnel items for you to consider this evening. Before I do, I just want to remind the community that Roy has sent out the annual tenure letter. We have 7 teachers who are eligible for tenure this year. I encourage you to look at that list and to share your thoughts with us. So this evening, you have before you agenda items. One probationary appointment, as well as some changes in overages that you had gotten earlier in the year, as well as an additional overage. Also, we have a couple of resignations, as well as appointments for substitute nurses, substitute clerical, and substitute teacher aide. And then you have a revised salary schedule for the non-union hourly staff, and that is due to a raise in minimum wage that will be effective December 31st. Also, there are a few revisions to the winter coaches roster. So I ask you to consider items A through K this evening.
any questions? I couldn't tell what changed on the winter coaches. It looked like maybe some experience maybe changed?
Exactly.
Were there any coaches added?
There were no coaches
Okay.
added. It was
So
years'
it's
experience, which impacted on a few stipends.
Okay.
They should be bolded and italicized. Okay.
That's maybe it's just my eyes. All right. Connie, can we have a motion on A through K?
Yes.
All right. Do I hear a motion to approve A through K?
Motion.
Second.
Susan and Jack. Second.
Let's see. And then we also have to approve the new schedule.
All in favor?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. Yep.
Do we have to approve the new grade schedule? Or that's part of it?
That's
right?
part of A through K.
Okay. I guess we move on to Dan.
Thank you.
Good evening. Connie, if we can start with the, let's see, the fund balance target. Can we start with that first? This slide and table comes out of a Finance Committee meeting last month where we wanted to do some work around targeting reserve levels in our restricted fund balances, and also looking at where we are, where we might be deficient, or where we might be a little overly reserved in some areas. And the reserves on this table are divided, as they are in our audit, between restricted, assigned, and unassigned. Restricted fund balance is a fund balance that's dedicated for a certain purpose. You can see it's unemployment reserve, ERS, which is our employee retirement system, TRS, liability and casualty claims, tax certiorari, and capital projects. Liability and casualty, well, the limitations or the targets are described in the second column and the rationale for each of them. For instance, some are limited by statute on what they can be. Liability and casualty claims is 3% of the budget. TRS is 2% of the total teachers' and administrators' payroll annually, which is about $400,000 and can't exceed 10% of the total compensation, which would be about $2 million. Tax certiorari, the law is kind of murky in that it's an amount which might be reasonably be deemed necessary for anticipated judgments and claims arising out of tax certiorari proceedings. What's really happened over the last decade since the village went to full value assessment is tax certiorari judgments and claims have kind of plummeted. Whereas they used to be hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, which we have to refund or bond out to refund. In the last 5 years, the average has been about $14,000 with a high of $53,000. That was the source of a comment in our audit, which basically said that our liability and casualty claims reserve is too high. And that's also the reason for the yellow highlight. Later on, there's going to be a recommendation for actually a transfer of fund balance from the tax certiorari reserve to the general fund, and then from the general fund to the liability and casualty claims, just to get us back where we are adequately reserved in that area to cover our self-insurance for flooding. And if you look at our assigned fund balances, the reserve for encumbrances line are purchase orders for goods and services not yet received, so that the purchase orders have not yet been liquidated and they're carried over to the next year. This amount varies from year to year, and it's really just a reflection of prior year activity more than anything else. And that can go anywhere from, $50,000 usually to, if we have something specific in there that was a high figure that had not been liquidated, like in the past year, almost 400,000. And then we have an appropriation to reduce the tax levy of about $500,000. And I think it's good. It's nice to note in the right-hand column where we think we're a little deficient. And where we think we're a little overly reserved. And I think the total, of about a deficiency of about $9 million for where would be considered, we're robust. Right now, we're adequate. Robust would be about $9 million in our capital projects reserve, because we have that space for that reserve, which is a $10 million total reserve availability, and which is now $1.6 million. And that's been a target for replacing athletic fields over time and other projects. We used it very effectively for the recent 2018 bond project to augment the bonded funds. And this is it's good to take a look at this, a close look to see where we are and where we could be over time. But, you know, flexibility is limited in that we have a 2% tax levy cap for the most part. And increasing these reserves through targeted budget appropriations to do so is nearly impossible with the tax cap. So the reserves have really only been added to through current year surpluses, through the transfers at the end of the year to keep us under the 4% unassigned fund balance limit. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding our either our reserve levels or any individual reserves.
Are we also looking to increase the money we set aside to ensure stability of our contributions to the teacher retirement system?
Exactly.
also?
If you see right now, our current reserve balance there is about $500,000, a little more. We could be keeping upwards of $2 million, which would add to our flexibility to get a budget passed under the tax levy cap in any given year.
I think this is great. I'd say long overdue, but it's really good. I think it should either tonight or another night, it needs to become part of our minutes so that if the state controller's office comes in and reviews or anybody else, we have something that documents that the board administration reviewed it and adopted the formula. And then I think each year, when you review this and adjust, that needs to go into the board minutes as well, so that we can document why we're keeping each reserve, why there's an amount that's in there that's tied to practice and risk, and how we're using that to adjust the amounts in the reserves from one year to the next. So Roy, I don't know whether you're ready tonight or the board is ready tonight, or maybe we should review it, think about it, and do it at the next board meeting. But I think it's important to establish that we're doing this intentionally and that this is not just Dan adjusting figures.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I'm not comfortable with the board putting minutes for myself personally. As you said, it's overdue the way we look at our reserves and where we should be and how we get there. So the sooner we get it in our minutes and make it part of the process.
And if 5 years from now the controller's office comes in and does one of their regular reviews, then you can verify that this was done intentionally.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think in different committees, and the audit committee and also the finance committee, we've talked about these reserves, but I'd say it hasn't been a strict rule. This is what we're looking at. It's more like, this is a number, let's talk about it. But I agree with you, Jack, a more defined reason of what the reserves are and how we came to that conclusion is a good exercise.
Yeah. And I think the more you can add to the formula to explain the rationale, the better.
Sure.
But this is, I agree with each of your amounts, your formulas. They make sense. And I think they will give future boards and administrations the opportunity to deal with unexpected spikes or other problems and not have to choose between cutting programs or doing something else crazy.
Great. Next, Connie, would be the financial report.
Go right to November.
Yeah, go right to November. There's October and November results In general, expenditures continue to remain somewhat murky in that the top variable in the district's cost structure remains unsettled, which is the BTA teacher's contract. Costs associated with that contract make up more than half of our general fund expenditure budget. If and when a settlement is reached, it will provide much more clarity towards predicting year-end surplus or deficit, and deal with that. And we've been in negotiations, and we will continue to do so, and hopefully we'll settle it with a few months to spare towards the end of the year, God willing. As of September 30th, as of November 30th, we know that staffing, FTE is slightly lower than anticipated, and that medical insurance costs are lower than anticipated due to both favorable final Oxford rates, which were unknown at budget time, and lower than anticipated participation, more buyouts and less covered staff and retirees. However, we're also seeing more outplaced special education students than anticipated, which is driving up costs in that area. Budget transfers from those favorable areas to the unfavorable areas have been completed through the end of November, which is why we're only showing a modest salary savings thus far. The special education outplacement tuition line will need to be adjusted in the forthcoming budget to add another student or two for next year, which we're already here. We're starting to see some clarity regarding revenues for 2021 and 22 as sales tax, non-resident tuition, COVID aid, and our $500,000 insurance recovery, which we recently received, are looking favorable, obviously, while interest income, special education tuition from districts are not expected to meet the budget. It's likely that the special education tuition line will result in decreasing anticipated revenues for 2022 and 23 budget as well. And I think what we're seeing is that enrollment is going down, and as costs are being examined in neighboring districts, they're trying to deal with a lot of their students the way we deal with ours, in-house. And we're seeing, less interest in our programs in that respect. Obviously, the extraordinary revenues are helping us cope with some of these extraordinary expenses to navigate through the year, sustaining our financial condition. However, as I am working on next year's budget, some of those adjustments are putting pressure on meeting the cap, but that's for next month.
So, does the FEMA money, is that where that money came from, the 500,000?
Yes.
So we received it?
Yeah.
It's in the bank? Good.
Well done, Dan.
Very
That's
good.
great.
It's, it was a plan. It came out of the finance committee, and the plan worked perfectly.
Right.
We were tested within a couple of months, unfortunately, and we ended up, being cash favorable in a year where we had a pretty bad flood.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's important to note that our self-insurance plus the FEMA dollars put us ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, at this point.
That's a really important point.
Yep, because we were looking at a premium of $500,000 for flood
Exactly.
insurance coverage.
Yeah.
And I do have a couple of financial action items. We have a resolution for a substitute and field trip nursing services with an individual who has provided those services for us for years, and who we're very happy with. And the aforementioned fund balance transfer from the tax certiorari reserve to the general fund, and then from the general fund to the insurance reserve. Simply, it's a two-step process which is required by statute. Anything coming out of the tax certiorari reserve has to go to the general fund. And then when it's in the general fund, we can do what we want with it. So I'd like the board to approve those two financial action items if possible.
Any more questions for Dan on either of those?
You need a resolution to put the reserves.
I don't need a resolution, I'll just put it in the minutes
Or maybe
as
just
it
show
was
that-
discussed, and I'll say it was as an attachment. Unless you'd like, you could have a resolution.
No, let's just say that the consensus of the board was in support of the formulas and the allocations. That's it.
Yeah, come up with the reserves, that is for that.
Great, Dan.
Thank you.
So as far as the action items, Connie, can we do both of them
Yeah.
at the same time? So with no more discussion, is there a motion to approve both of the financial action items as discussed?
Motion to approve.
Nikki?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I have a facilities update. We have a tentative date for delivery of doors and hardware, which is March. You know, I'd mark it on your calendar, but I wouldn't plan anything around it. And the electric and HVAC punch list is a work in progress. So we're still about at 99% complete. And we had an interesting event last Friday in that, you know, I thought we were done with water for the year. Usually the winter is pretty good, but we had a hot water return pipe from our HVAC system. A fitting came loose, and it was a 4-inch pipe. So we got a lot of hot water really fast down on the first level of the B wing, which, and the steam set off the fire alarm, and it was, I don't know, probably 38 degrees outside or something, so we had a lot of kids in short sleeves out there. And I was amazed at how much water could come out really quickly, but our guys did a phenomenal job in getting the water shut, and then cleaning up and fixed by about noon. You know, we had the heat back on in that wing by about noon, which was phenomenal, and people back in their classrooms. Now, the difference between that water and flood water is that water was clean. So all we had to do was mop it up, you know, dry everything off, and, you know, right back to work. When we get flood water in the building, it's not clean, and that requires a whole different ball of wax. Speaking of flood recovery, it is complete. All spaces are available, and the guidance office furniture with the metal legs has been delivered. Is it set up yet, or is it still in the boxes?
No, that was a different order. It's coming.
Okay, it's coming.
It's coming.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
And that's it for the facilities update. No facilities action items.
Just a question on the, overall project. Are we holding back money until all these final?
Oh, yeah. We hold 5% retainage.
So
Which-
there's still incentive for them to
Oh,
work hard
sure.
to get this done?
Yeah,
Okay.
on each contract. So if it's a $2 million contract for the plumber, we're holding $100,000.
Yeah.
So there is still incentive for them to, you know, trying to drag them back is difficult at times, but they're not getting their money if they don't finish the job. Simple as that.
And it's more of a materials issue
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah, it's supply chain issues
Yeah.
that are really killing us in getting it done. You know, we have the temporary doors, which are fine for being temporary until you get a flood that, you know, seeps into the doors, and then you got to get rid of the doors and get more temporary doors. But you know, we want our doors.
Yeah, I understand. All right, thanks, Dan.
My pleasure.
So we have a number of policies, either first reading or second reading. I don't know if Roy, you want to talk about any of these policies?
Very quickly, as you know, we're going through our policy manual and working with NISBA, who give us updates regarding our policy manual and new policies that come out. So the policies that you see before you, first two are a second reading, so once they get approved, they'll write to our policy manual as new policies. The other 7 policies are policies that are required And as you can see on the notes, they're new or slightly revised. A lot of them are new for us. We didn't have them in our policy manual that are required. So we're just going through the process of updating things. Nothing, there's no real changes to our practice as a result of these policies, but they're on for a first read.
So I don't know if people on the board had questions on any of these policies, read through them. I mean, I thought it was interesting that some of them were a couple more general policies that then you had to make into 3 separate policies regarding some of the things. Sexual harassment.
Yeah, sexual harassment, they're required to have them separate now for students and employees. Ours currently has it all as one.
But there's no fundamental shift in any
No.
of these, basically the practices you follow.
Correct.
No.
That's correct.
No.
Okay. All right. So, Connie, do we have to have a motion to approve the second readings?
Yes,
All right.
that's
So,
A.
sorry?
We have to have a motion for both. A.
Well,
We'll
A
take
and B.
maybe.
So, Adam, if there's more discussion, if we could have a motion to approve the second reading in A. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And if we got a motion to approve the first reading and B for the number of policies that we are outlined.
Motion approved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. All right, moving along, committee reports. I think we had a finance committee, but I think that would have been discussed the last meeting that I missed. And it was really about the reserves that we talked about, which he did a great job explaining at that point. I think the action on the calendar, just so everybody is aware, we changed the January board meeting from a Thursday. Is it following Tuesday? Or
Yes, the following Tuesday.
January.
So now
Yeah,
it's
we need to,
January
we need a
25th. Oh, we have a
motion
motion
on
on that?
that.
Yes.
Can I have a motion to approve changing the date of the next board meeting until January 25th? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Were there, before I should have moved on, were there any other committees, reports? I think there was. Okay. I guess at this point, we can open it up to the public. I don't know if there's anything online.
There is one question
There's
on.
one question on the chat.
Should we do that first, or it looks like we have somebody wants to talk?
Yeah.
Whatever you think.
Well, we can go first if these gentlemen's
Thank you. Justin Chow, middle school teacher. I'm here as a representative of the teachers who work diligently for the students of Bronxville. You may have noticed that we have been wearing red to show solidarity while we're in the process of negotiating a teacher contract. There are some teachers here, and there's also some teachers online wearing red to show their support this evening. On behalf of the BTA, we want to thank you to the board for continuing the negotiations, and we hope for a fair contract, and that it will be reached for the teachers who continue to provide the highest quality education for the students of Bronxville. We, the BTA, we want to wish you all a very happy and hopefully much healthier new year season. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the question online is from a Sandra B, and it's to Dan regarding non-residents. How many are currently attending the Bronxville school and not paying tuition? And she's not referring to teachers' children.
Not paying tuition?
We are chasing down a number of referrals. I would put that number probably in the 5 or 6 student range.
That's not really the question, Dan. The question is how many non-residents have children attending Bronxville and not paying tuition? If we know of any,
We know,
we go after them and
yes,
pursue it.
and we are currently going after some.
But the answer is no.
The answer is no. That's our goal, is to have no.
Exactly.
There are a couple that we get information about that may be living outside the Bronxville area that we have to do our due diligence on, find out information, and then once we get all the evidence, we present it and do what we need to do. Follow.
But the general practice is that if you're not a resident of Bronxville, you can't send your kids to Fruity Bronxville School.
That is correct. That is correct.
I think that's what their question was probably trying to get to.
And we encourage community members to let us know. I
Sure.
mean, we only
People know
know,
information, let us know,
that's right.
so we can follow up.
Yeah, because it's not fair that all the people that live in
That's correct.
Bronxville can they're paying up taxes to support the school.
Correct.
So
Exactly.
it's not fair.
And like Dan said, we are actively following up at the moment on certain references that were given to us.
Anyone else from the, want to talk? Okay. With that, kind of a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Jack?
Second. All in favor?
On
Aye. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.